We continue discussing the student class, and in this video we focus on the constructors of the student class. The objectives for this movie are to understand the syntax for multiple constructors within the same class. We also will understand the need for multiple constructors within the same class, and then we will bounce back and forth between the student class and the test student class, the driver for it, that uses different constructors. 3 things that I want you to know that are true for constructors in Java are these following. A constructor must have the same identifier as the class. So our class is called student. We're following convention and we have an uppercase S. So the constructor, or multiple constructors as we're going to talk about, must all be called student. A constructor is called automatically. That means you don't pass it a message like you would a towel to change its color or ask what color it is. It is called automatically when you create a new object. A constructor has no return type. We haven't talked about methods very much, but remember that if you pass a message to a towel and ask it what is its color, it returns a string. So a constructor has no return type. It cannot spit back an answer. Once again, a constructor must have the same identifier as the class. A constructor is called automatically, and a constructor has no return type. I will definitely expect you to remember those 3. Remember that the purpose of the constructor is to initialize the private data members. You can also call them instance variables. We haven't talked much about the keyword new. It's a reserved word, and we've talked about the fact that it has to be used when we make an object. A constructor is a method, just like any method, but the only time a constructor is used is when you make a new object. A constructor will never be used to change the value of a private data member. I'm going to bring up the code in JCreator in just a minute. On this slide in the PowerPoint, I focus on just the constructors. You can see that right here I have the only one that we've talked about in class so far. If I make a new student and don't pass it anything in this parentheses, then it creates a default student. And that student, as we've talked about before, has an empty string for a name. It has zeros for its test scores. But what if I wanted to make a student and I knew the student's name and I knew the test scores that I wanted to put in? Then it might make sense to look at a constructor like this. I would say that this student constructor accepts 4 values in its parameter list. It accepts a string and then 3 integers. And in the body of that constructor, right here, you see that whatever value I passed it in for the string, it's going to take the value, which is temporarily called nm, and assign it to name. And remember that name was one of the private data members. The second value that I put inside the parentheses better be an int, because that's the data type it's expecting, and it is temporarily called t1, and t1 is assigned to test1. Similarly, t2 will be assigned to test2 and t3 to test3. And then finally, we have a constructor down here that I would call the copy constructor. What we want to do is we want to make a student that is just like another student. Down here, I make another constructor, a third one, and what it takes in its parenthesis from the driver, what it accepts as a parameter, is another student. And this student is called S. S knows its name and its 3 test scores, and so when I say name is assigned s.name, this student that I am passing has its own memory allocation already. It knows its name, its test 1, test 2, and test 3 scores. What I'm doing is I'm making a new student, and I'm saying, go grab S's name and assign it to mine. go grab their test score, test 1, and assign it to my test 1. Go grab their test 2 and assign it to my test 2. And the same thing for test 3. So that's a little confusing. Let's look to see how we might do this. I have the whole student class here. Remember, right here was the private data members right at the very top. And here are the 3 constructors that I just mentioned. How do you use these? Let's pull up a driver class. I call this test student, and you see that I have created right here 2 students, student S1 and student S2. Student S2 is going to have to wait. Student S1 is created right here, and by the fact that I've put nothing in this parenthesis set, it means that I am calling the default constructor. We toggle back to a student and we say, oh, what does the default constructor do? It assigns the private data members a empty string and 3 zeros for its test values. But now we remember that we have certain methods available. We can set the name and the score of all of the private data members that define a student. Therefore, when we print this out, system.out.println, here is student 1, and you see that I'm using our new escape sequence. So within this string, I have put \n, so it's going to skip a line, and then at the end of this string, I put a \n, so it's going to skip a line. In this particular case, I encased it in the single literal string at the beginning and at the end of it. Here student S1 is printed from the literal string, and then we have also discussed in class that a student knows how to print itself, and what that means basically is it just prints out its name and the test scores and the average. That's what we've decided is a good idea, how to print out a student. You see up here that I have declared 2 students though, and I've kind of ignored S2. And I'm going to use S2 a little bit differently than I did in the PowerPoint slides available online. I'm going to make S2 and assign it a value. And I'm going to grab new memory space, and we want S2 to be a new student. But we want to go ahead and use the second constructor that we know we have, and we remember exactly the order that information needs to be fed to it by toggling to the student class. I need a string first that represents the name, and then 3 test scores. So let's go back to the driver, and let's have our new test person be called Mary. And let's have Mary be not so great of a student. She has test scores of 50, 70, and she really studied for the last test, and she got a 75 on her test. Now let's just make sure we didn't do anything wrong, and so we'll go ahead and compile it. And we see that we have no errors. What I'm going to do is have Mary print out herself. And change my literal string to S2. And we should see Mary print out herself after Bill does. And so you see the new line right here. That was from this, remember? And then Mary prints out, and her average is 65. So this shows the constructor. And I'll write it like that. So this shows demonstration of the constructor that accepts multiple parameters. Let's demo the copy constructor. And I want to make another student, and I'll call it S3. And I want student S3 to be just like Bill. And I will say new student S3 is assigned new student. And I'm going to pass Bill, but Bill, the name of the object for Bill is S1. So S1 is the student object. That's the identifier for the student object. Therefore, I'm referring to him as Bill, but his identifier for the program is S1. If I ask our newest student, S3, to print out itself, I will just change this. And what we're expecting is Bill to print out, and then Mary, and then Bill. So there's Bill, there's Mary, and there's Bill again. So this isn't really Bill. This is S3's information. This is S1's information. And Mary's just kind of doing her own thing now. It might be logical for you to think that we could make another student, and we'll call this S4, and just give it part of the information. Like, could we just give it the name? And let's pick, I don't know, Julio. So let's run this and see what we get. Okay, after compiling, it says that we have one error. So let's see what that is. All right, so this is where I stored it. Cannot find symbol. Cannot find symbol student. It cannot find constructor student java.lang.string. Java.lang just means that that's the library where string is defined in Java. But here's what this is saying. It's in the student class. It can't find a constructor that just takes a string, because we have compiled a student class that takes nothing. It takes a string plus 3 integers, or it takes another student. Therefore, we cannot give it just one of the values. You have to match exactly the data type and the order in order for that to work. So we'll just comment out Julio because he's going to cause problems, and make sure that we can compile again. And there we go. So that's all for this video on constructors.